lecture 4 of the History of Science series. Let me bring you up to speed to what we're going to do today. First, if nothing happened, the assignment will be discussed, then shortly the syllabus, then I'll be focusing on the nation state review and summarize at the end. Let's hit and run. The assignment, in general, let's start with my own role in this. If the feedback is not helpful, please get back to me. This can happen. Both Vincent and I are doing our best to provide helpful feedback that helps you restructure your text or find the appropriate examples or the appropriate values if necessary. If I read your text and think, oh, this guy knows or this girl knows what the values are, he just doesn't write it down, then my feedback is short. Then I just mention that you should mention these values and go on with the next feedback round. But I might be mistaken in this, so please just get back to me or to Vincent if anything's unclear. In an ideal world, you read the feedback and think, oh, now I know how to formulate this question, an appropriate answer to this question. That's the ideal thing that happens. So have a good look at the feedback, and then if it's not helpful, get back to me. Either here in person, I'm always here during the break, and a quarter of an hour before the lecture, or by email if you prefer. Or if you think it's a general question, raise your hand and ask it. Now then, in general, please don't copy and paste. I had a couple of large quotes in your assignments. Great quotes, really great quotes, sometimes very relevant. But unless you have a fabulous memory, you won't be able to do that during the exam. So, yeah, simply don't. Try to write from memory, or if you can't produce an answer from memory, reread the syllabus, go through your lecture notes, and cough up one. Yeah, that's the idea. Yes, I know there's a lot of info. I know there's a lot of stories and a lot of facts that can be at play here. I know. I don't expect you to know them all. I just expect you to know many. Yeah, that's and you have in the assignments you don't, but in the exam you have this freedom of choice. So yeah, usually students can do that. One particular thing that struck Vincent is that in question 2, only a few of you came up with actually clarifying examples. There were hardly, so the question about the universality of Mathesis. Why was it called universal? Many of you gave an answer that showed that you knew what you were talking about, but no examples. Provide an example just to baffle me, just to show me that you know your stuff, but make it relevant so that it actually supports the claim that you make. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, you can make many answers on this question could be correct. Vincent uses a model sheet that I handed him, and there are about 8 or 9 possible combinations of answers that 8 or 9 possible answers to that question. Yeah, that I think could occur, and perhaps there are even some other answers that I haven't thought out yet, and that you came up with. So, yeah, every answer begs for another example, or an example phrased in other words. with different emphasis on specifics that illustrate that specific answer. So please mention that answer and use it to build your case, to build your answer. That missed. Then, back to the prejudices. I came across this first one quite a lot. The concise definition of enlightenment. And this is one, and variations on that occurred as well. So, a concise definition of the Enlightenment is that it was a philosophical, intellectual and cultural movement during the 17th and 18th centuries, which stressed reason, logic and freedom of thought over dogma and blind faith. Yes, well, this is a concise definition for sure. Sometimes the next sentence followed. Not for nothing people call it the age of reason. And indeed, not for nothing, there is a value already behind this definition. Calling it the age of reason kind of values our present day reason and projects it on the 18th, 19th century. Was it there? Well, in a sense it was. It's not complete nonsense, of course not. But what I've shown you last week was that there was more to it than just the logic over dogma and blind faith. Blind faith, by the way, is suggesting that there's something bad about faith. Yeah? I have absolute faith in mathematics. But I'm aware of it. I'm aware that it is faith that I have there, and not blind dogma. Yeah? I think it is better than, well, for example, Catholicism or whatever other faith you can come up with. But that's my view. And I know a lot of colleagues who can combine both their faith in whatever religion and their faith in mathematics or whatever subject they teach. It's, calling it the age of reason is either done by people who have a political agenda in trying to push you in a certain direction of thinking, or by the blind masses following that person. Then you get these kind of things. Yeah, the age of reason, that's the moment that we got smart. That's the standard story. That's not the Enlightenment. Yes.
I have a hard time thinking of another way to describe the time period.
It is hard. What I tried to explain last week is that there are more facets to it. So people like Newton, people like Leibniz were religious, deeply religious people who worked their way through mathematics because they thought that they could describe creation in that way. So their motivation for doing mathematics was religious, was this, well, if you want to call it deep and blind faith. That was their motivation. Does it come instead of logic? No. It doesn't come instead, well, not with them at least. Were there people where mathematics came instead of faith? There might have been, but I don't know that. Which is kind of telling because I do know quite a lot of people from that time frame. So it's, there is one specific example that comes to mind is Spinoza. Spinoza is well known as having been called an atheist in the 18th century. Yeah, if you go and read Spinoza, you realize that being called an atheist in the 18th century was not being called an atheist today. You realize that at that time politics was at play, and he wasn't an atheist at all. He was just not presupposing religion. He thought, well, I have to be religious. He was religious, and I want to explain to people that they should be as well, but I don't presume that all of them have been receiving that revelation that I have, which is slightly different. Yeah, you might call that atheistic, at least people at that time did, but that's quite different from people today. Yeah? If you are an atheist today, then you simply don't believe in a God. Spinoza believed in God, very deeply so, but he just wanted, what was at stake there was politics very much. The church was losing power rapidly, the states were gaining in power rapidly, and so were several banking families, several rich merchant families. That's what was shifting there. And what else is it than this concise definition? That's kind of hard to tell. I want you to realize that if you trust the blind, distrust the blind definitions. See that there's values behind them, and try to find out what is this value that behind this. It might be just simple dumb copying. Yeah, a lot of people do blind dumb copying, and that works. That's the way that that these kind of stories come into being and become true. You can make stories become true. Go behind the story, look at who wrote it, why did he write it. Yeah? History is always written with hindsight. You might say, if you are very gloomy like I am, history is written by the winners. And had Hitler won the Second World War, I would not have stand here telling you this story. I would have told you a quite different story that has where there are similarities between the storylines, but it would have been a different story in the end. You might say, but science is not politics, is it? Well, yes, it is. Partly it is. With mathematics, it's the same as with international politics. In science, there are people who win, who are recognized as the best in their field, and there are people who remain in the shadows, contribute to that greatness, but are hardly recognized. Many of these people exist in history. We'll see a couple of them today. In the 19th century, mostly women were. Yeah, they were kept in the shadows and did the work where the man could then catch the glory that came from the work. That happened. History is written with hindsight. Don't take my story at face value either. You may, I'm telling you a story, amazing stories I call it, and that's with reason. I just love the stories. I love these old mathematicians and these old business analysts who try to get to grips with whatever they think they are doing. I hope to show you that whatever you think you're doing is for a reason as well. People want you to do what you're doing. And mostly that's for a good reason. Mostly that's quite sensible, but it has values behind that, and try to reflect on that. So use the concise definition if you must, but be aware that you can at least how do you say it? You can relativate, you can deviate from that definition and see that there are specific points where you could easily shoot holes in that specific definition. Certainly if you take it very literal and very strict. So that's at least, you can say that at least. Okay, here's some prejudices. Back in the 18th century, mathematicians were not capable of understanding the implications their inventions and discoveries had for the future of mathematics. I loved this one. I really did. What's the prejudice here? Or perhaps it's not as much a prejudice. Yes?
That we can use it today.
Yes. Can you today? Can you imagine what's going to be useful and No, you can't. So, yeah, you can blame them for that, but that's senseless. It doesn't make sense at all. So, yeah, duh, they didn't, no. But what's the relevance of the remark? It's a nice remark in itself, but it shows, it illustrates exactly your prejudice that history is happening for us today. Well, it didn't. People back then didn't do their mathematics because they thought, well, in a few hundred years, that guy there in the third row might be using my theorem. No, that was not his idea. That was not the idea why they were doing mathematics at all. They had their own sense and purposes, their own purpose and use for doing what they did. And trying to find that out, that makes the amazing story, in my opinion. Is that the absolute truth? No, it isn't. But it is giving you another story that forces you to reflect on what the hell is it that we are doing here? And that's, yeah. The second one, I like that one as well. Pascal, Butler, and Leibniz were working on probability as part of their mathematical endeavors. Okay, that's not always see the same hands. Who can tell me what's the prejudice here? And I think I already mentioned it last week or the week before. No one? Yes, please.
Leibniz the probability for law purposes.
Quite. Probability theory, numbers in general, we associate them with mathematics quite easily, or perhaps with information data science or whatever, but we associate it immediately with mathematics. That's not, that's our prejudice. That's our prejudice. To Leibniz, probability theory was a part of law. Yes, and you can read Leibniz's ideas on probability theory and say, hey, he's making a mistake. And he is, in the mathematical sense of the word, he's making the stupidest mistakes you can imagine in basic probability calculus. But that's because he isn't doing mathematics at all. He's doing law, and in law, that was the standard way of going about with these numbers. Butler was a theologian. He was doing theology. He wasn't doing mathematics at all. He never called himself a mathematician. Yes, he did probability calculus, you could say. But that was part of theology to him. It was God who decided whether you would win or whether you would lose, whether you would die or live, whether you whatever, yeah? And, well, if not God, perhaps the king could decide upon your death or, yeah? But blind faith in probability is what defines us. And it's not bad to have blind faith in probability calculus. It works for us. At least I firmly believe that you can calculate these things on the basis of what I've done in mathematics. Yeah. But to them it was not mathematics. Pascal, I have to be careful. I'm not sure. I haven't read Pascal's probability calculus, so I don't know if he's actually thinking that he's doing mathematics or that he's in law, which he studied as well. So it might have been both. I don't know. Yes?
I was just wondering, isn't there like one of the first programming languages that was named after Pascal? Is it
Pascal. That's the same guy, yeah. Pascal is the one named, yeah. So is Ada, is also a programming language named after Ada Lovelace. Yeah, that's this Pascal. Blaise Pascal, 17th century French philosopher. But okay, so don't be tempted too easily to think, oh, this is about numbers, so it must be about mathematics. That's our prejudice, and it works today. It doesn't always work that way. The third one. Hence, it became more commonly integrated in society. That's about mathematics, of course. And gave more people the incentive to learn mathematics, whereas in most centuries before, from the fall of the Western Roman Empire, it was thought of as heathen and therefore possibly fatal. I was kind of struck by this one. Why? Yes? Yes, please.
Because centuries before it was mathematics was widely used, but then in different motivation.
Right. Yeah. In the syllabus you should have read about Oram, about Gerbert of Aurillac, about a number of people who were deeply involved in mathematics. Perhaps not always because they wanted to be a mathematician, or mostly because they didn't want to be a mathematician, but they were deeply involved in mathematics. They didn't consider it heathen or possibly fatal. No, they built their lives around it. They became pope by using mathematics. Well, perhaps not by using mathematics, but it didn't hamper their career. Yeah, so please refrain from this remark that this last one is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And you can't say that in blind faith after having read chapters 2 and 3. 1, 2 and 3. Okay. More one. There's one that's this is getting back to the first one really. So the underlying value behind Enlightenment thinking is the questioning of assumptions of traditional values that have held since the dawn of Western civilization. I do love the phrasing, by the way. The dawn of this is kind of phrasing that immediately sparks a light in my eyes. It is beautiful, but unfortunately it's untrue. Yeah. Unfortunately. It's not since the dawn. There are no traditional values that have held since the dawn of it. That's what I hope that you can read from this syllabus. These values change continually. They are with the ancient Greek. They are different with the Romans. They are different with the late medieval people, and they continually shift to and even vary among several groups of people using mathematics. So, no, please. I like the phrase, and I don't mind if you use it, but be aware and reflect on the phrase as soon as you've written it down, because there are various meanings to enlightenment. Yeah, it's not just this logic over blind faith. No, it's logic joining forces with faith. It's logic becoming a part of the standard workforce of the bookkeeper, the engineer, the gardener, the painter. All of that was also part of enlightenment. So it's not just, yeah? And all of these had different core values to their system. So there were various meanings to that word. Questioning traditional values, and that happens quite a lot, and that happens in enlightenment for sure, but questioning these traditional values, that's typically what happens when power structure upholding these traditions crumble. The power of the church, the power of kings was crumbling in the 18th century. 17th and 18th century, mind you. Yes, the church was losing its grip completely. Yeah, where the Pope had been crowning the Roman Emperor for ages, he could no longer, well, play the role that he wanted to play in the decision of who would become the emperor in Europe. He couldn't. Half of Europe was no longer Catholic. For God's sake, that was hell already. And the half that still was Catholic, well, kind of conspired against him to, well, have their preferred Pope installed. So the office of the Pope, the papal state, the papal army was crumbling. It could not uphold its power. Meanwhile, the kingdoms themselves were losing power as well. They were fighting, quarreling among each other, but within these kingdoms, there was a rising system of banks and wealthy merchants who gained money, which slowly, as an economical force, became more and more important, whereas the land-driven economy of the nobility was, losing its significance. The Dutch armies The Dutch armies were equipped with guns, for example, which were paid partly with money by the Spanish. Yeah, with Spanish money. So, with money that was received from the people whom they were fighting. If you go to the city centre and walk across if you go from the town square, the old town square, walk in the direction of the Mint, you come across the Trippenhuis, built by the brothers Tripp, late 17th century. They had earned their money by selling guns both to the Dutch and the Spanish troops. And you can see that reflected in the house that they built. It's a huge house, and on the epitaphs there are guns, cannons, and all of these are depicted in the artistry of this building. So yes, that's how people got rich, selling guns. They still do, by the way. They still do. Which is,
How do the Spanish then pay for the guns?
Well, the Spanish, in the early 17th century, the Spanish had this huge empire all across the globe where they could drop gold from practically everywhere. And that's how they got their money in the first place. So the Spanish were rich, and it was then the Spanish gold that was used again to buy guns for the Dutch. It was, this is kind of a strange story, but this happens, Power structures crumbled, and crumble continually. Follow the money is always easy to say, well that has not always been the case. Follow where the horses live or where the landowners are would have been more appropriate before the 18th century. But from the middle of the 17th century onwards, follow the money is a good idea. Who pays? Who pays? And what do they want in return? It's a good idea to just check. And when traditional values change, when traditional values change, usually something is happening in the underlying power structures. Look, that's mostly one thing that you can have a look for. Look who builds the Arc de Triomphe, the triumphal arcs. In the Roman Empire, it was the state that built these arcs. Look who builds the palaces. It's no longer the nobility that builds the palaces. They still live there in these old and drafted places. But who builds the palaces? Well, and you have to go across the street here. See, that's where the money is. That's where the power structures are. That's the place where you want to go and look if you want to know who decides on where we are going. Do we agree? Yes, we do. At least partly we do. Or we would do something about it, wouldn't we? We still live in a democracy, and at least I believe we should try to uphold that. But, okay. Now this question, enlightenment and mathematical progress. That was the question, right? You remember? You remember the question. There are three ways of approaching generally. There are probably more ways that you can combine perhaps several of these, but there are three ways in general that you could approach this question. You could start by reflecting on enlightenment, the meaning of enlightenment, and taking two of these meanings and juxtapose those. Or you could start by mentioning what does mathematical progress mean? What is mathematical progress? That's what I do in the syllabus, right? There I say, well, mathematical progress is not necessarily what we think that mathematical progress is. You could say that a lot of mathematical progress was taking place in the 18th century, and was taking place on the field of gardening, on the field of painting, all these kinds. There was more people looked more to mathematics as a way of solving their problems. Yes?
What I find difficult is that this phrase can be stated in multiple ways. But should you take a position on one of the ways to explain it, and then form two opinions, and then juxtapose those? Or should you state two opinions where each opinion follows a different explanation of
You can do both.
the question.
Oh, sorry, you can do either. So either, yeah, but do stick to one of these lines. You juxtapose two opinions, two views.
Yeah, okay, but you explain what
Yeah.
could mean, what could have been by that
Yeah.
statement, and
Yeah.
then you take that position.
You take you take two positions.
Yeah, but on the
Yeah.
same, on the same definition of the meaning.
I would say so. I would keep as much. Yeah, I would keep. You can, of course, you can start by breaking down the whole question, all three things at the same time. And then you start. Then you end up writing a book, and I won't
Yeah.
have. Yeah, that's not the idea of the question. I want you to show that you are aware of that, and you can you can tell me that you are aware of that, and say I picked these two views from the abundance of views that I might have picked. Yeah. But I take two because that's what is requested, and I go and analyze the values behind that.
So you could state that for the sake of this question,
Yeah.
by enlightenment we mean something.
Yeah, yeah. But then you reflect on that meaning and say, yes, and if you uphold that meaning of enlightenment, you would tell you would focus on these and these details in the story of enlightenment. Note that indeed mathematical progress is taking place, or indeed it's not taking place at all. But you might tell another story, because if you only tell that part of the story, you leave out these and these details. And these fit a slightly different story, where you take a slightly different position than the one I originally mentioned. How is it possible that we can tell two stories about the same thing? Yeah. Well, there are different values at stake, which is there, and that one there. And yeah, that's the kind of that could be a way of going about. That's the level 0 and level 1 approach. Yeah, so these three approaches could be taken. I have here one. Yeah. So if you take the age of reason, view, for example, you could focus on the story of Newton and tell how enormously important he has been during the 17th and 18th century. That he devised a whole structure of within the Principia, where he explained how not the whole universe, but at least the solar system works, etc., etc. Yeah, he thought of. He wrote a book on optics. He wrote several very important and very still valuable pieces of work that we love endearingly. And then you would say, or then you could say, indeed, Enlightenment thinking has had an enormous influence on the progress of mathematics. You could say that, you could tell that story. But, yeah, you could tell the story of Madame Ferrand here reading the Optics by Newton. But then you miss out on several of the other stories about Newton. Yeah? You could tell the story of enlightenment that describes it as a multifaceted, very slow process of using more new methods on held convictions. Slowly and eroding some of these convictions, mind you, not all of them. So that would be another enlightenment. You would have another story. You would focus, for example, on the do I mention that here? No, I don't. You would focus, for example, on the other things that Newton did as well, and that are left out in the original story. The fact that Newton was working on alchemy, which we consider completely ludicrous nowadays, and that he himself considered that as a much more important contribution to science than his Principia. Yeah, you could mention these kind of things. You get another story, you get other details. And then you go up to the values. The accepted trivialities, such as the stability of the solar system. And this time, yeah, the stability of the solar system is another great example. Newton he doesn't even consider that the solar system could be unstable. That's a 19th century problem. Then, in the 19th century, people start wondering, hey, it works that way, is it stable? Which is a rather modern question to ask. To Newton, it was, yeah, well, did it matter? If it wasn't stable, then God would just so now and then flip it again and it would stay working. It's completely irrelevant, it doesn't pop up in his mind at all. That's a very 19th century question, stability of the solar system. That's, yeah, so, yeah. So in a sense, Newton was very true to his faith. He never left it. There's quite a lot of value that you present then, if you juxtapose that to the original Enlightenment view of Newton as the bold man who presents his mathematics to the world and as if it's the ultimate truth. He did that as well, but at the same time, so you can tell these two stories and you can, bring values in place that are founded in various ideas about science or in various ideas about human progress. What does it mean? Do we progress as mankind, or do we just stumble about in history and do stuff? Yeah, what is it that happens there? Is science essential to mankind, or is it just the spare time of the nobleman who Newton was in the end? So, what is it? To us, science is a profession. Yeah, that wasn't the case with Newton. So he had other motives to do his job. Try to spot the values, discuss these values, and see how the two different stories are simply two sides of the same coin. Both can be exaggerated in their way, and well, the kind of reflections that are most beautiful are those that choose not the extreme points of view, but those who are closer together and are both already taking things into perspective, but slightly different things. The second view suggests that our values are found in the powers that be, that erode and erupt finally in the French Revolution. That's where you can look for your value. That's where the kind of values you could describe. Can you describe others? Yes, you can, and you probably will. Yeah, but just think what kind of values are it, and adjust or no, pick the examples that fit your story, that fit your values. That's important there. So, if you pick the first line of thought, you of course pick the Principia and juxtapose that with the alchemy work. Or you pick Leibniz's work, and contrast it with his theology, work in theology. Whereas if you take the second juxtaposition, you would take the Gardner of Knoop, and you would take Benjamin Franklin as examples, which would work there much more typically than the others. Now, I'm not going to bore you anymore with more reflections, unless there are questions. No questions. Okay. Last week, someone approached me on the syllabus, asking what the general idea of the text was. I thought I had written that down in the introduction, and I reread it, and well, I kind of did, but it's perhaps a little hidden. So just to inform you, every chapter starts with an introduction to the topics that are going to be discussed. Now and then, and in particular in the chapter that you've been reading today, and in the chapter that I'm still revising for in 2 weeks, now and then these introductions tend to be far too long because, well, in the past couple of years I noticed that not everybody is aware of certain historical developments. And yeah, I want you to be aware of certain historical developments. I want you to be aware that World War II took place. I want you to be aware that, well, the French Revolution took place. I want you to be, such kind of things. I take them for granted and notice that it was not, that was not always fair to take for granted. So I kind of put them in these introductions where they don't really belong, so now and then. So I'm reading the introductions for next year. You still have to do with pretty long introductions, but every introduction contains at least an exposition of which subjects are treated in this chapter and why. And you may ask yourself that question with every section that you read. Why this section? Why this one? And with every example that's presented in that section, why this example? What does this example illustrate? Why does he put it in here? And I hope you will find, although I won't vouch for it, but I hope you'll find that most examples, that all examples are in fact, illustrating one of the things that are discussed in that section, and that these sections are indeed focused on a specific line of thought that is developing in that particular time frame. So that's the role of examples. And I encourage you to use that similar kind or other examples that you find wherever, to use examples in the answers that you produce. In this particular paragraph, or in this particular chapter that you've been reading for today, one of the things discussed is the introduction of the metric systems of points, measures, and weights, which is something that happened in the early 19th century, together with the introduction of the state-funded educational system, together with, and the metric system takes place within that curriculum. But in that curriculum there's also language. You're going to learn English, proper English, not Welsh, not Scottish. No, you're going to learn proper English, which is London English, without the accent. Yeah. Or you're going to, if you happen to live in the Netherlands, you're going to learn Dutch, which is not the peculiar language that they speak in the southern parts of the country, but it's the language that they speak in The Hague. So it's defined what it means to be Dutch. It is defined what it means to be English, what it means to be French. French, that's the Paris dialect, not the thing that I speak in Bordeaux, or the horrible language that I make of it in the Provence, which is quite illegible if you happen to speak French at all. But Paris French, that's France, that's French, not all these other dialects. And the metric system is part of that same process. So the introduction of the metric system helps in creating a state, where before you were part of a village, or you were part of perhaps a county. That was. So the people in Amsterdam would have a different system of coins and measures than the people in Leiden, which is just, 20 minutes by train, yes? They would have another system of measures and weights than the people in Eindhoven or Groningen or wherever. Yeah? They would all have their own coin systems, their own lengths, all their own areas. I think I gave a couple of examples in the syllabus. I did. Yeah. But this is an important novelty introduced in the early 19th century in several countries, and they all call it their own metric system. Of course, it originally wasn't intended to be universal, but universal. First thing happening was, of course, the French and the British got into a fight, so it was either the British or the French system, and then the Germans didn't want to, and the Dutch didn't want. In the end, there were several metric systems introduced, but every country had its decimal metric system, which is quite big. And that was something that was promoted by the mathematicians, amongst others. So what I just wanted to say about the syllabus. Are there any questions about the syllabus from you? No. No one?
I just had a question about, so there was a new type of school, right, in like the 18th century, so like a technical something. I just didn't really understand where in the school system that belonged. So like high school or something.
Yeah.
How
Oh,
did
that's difficult as well. Yeah, it's. I think I left that out on purpose. But we would call it. We would call it university level.
Okay. There was already university. So that's
Hmm?
there were already
universities. Yes, but universities. That's the difference between the school system back then and the school system now. Back then, the school systems were on the basis of social class. So people of high standing went to a university and had education in Latin and Greek. People of lower stature would have education in French, German, Dutch, English, one of the vernaculars, two of the vernaculars. And they would have, they would go to a technical college afterwards.
Yeah, because now it's.
And nowadays
funded by the
that's one, yeah.
But so did some of the universities change to technical college, or did they remain universities?
No, in fact, the technical universities were technical high schools before. So they were not. They became technical universities in the 20th century only. So rather late. But yeah. Let's have a break and resume in 12 minutes. 7 seconds.